On our last episode, Jason Statham stood in a forgotten Omega chamber and saw himself, not the soldier they labeled W4 but the erased prototype E5. Echo heard it, the boy confirmed it, and the photo proved the truth. But before Jason could process what it meant, the old terminal unsealed a vault the world had buried for 16 years, triggering a silent war far beyond those woods. Now, someone else knows he's alive. And they've only got 72 hours before that window closes. The sun had barely touched the frost when Jason Statham stepped outside the cabin. The forest didn't feel the same anymore. Not after the Omega terminal came alive. The silence wasn't silence now. It felt like something was watching, calculating, waiting. The trees whispered more than wind. He stood still for a moment, adjusting the strap of the duffel bag over his shoulder. Inside was the injector he hadn't used, the photo, and a sealed drive Echo recovered from the cabin's wall lining. The children were inside, still asleep. Echo stood near the tree line, binoculars sweeping east. She didn't look at him, but her posture said enough. They were being tracked. 60 kilometers south, a blacked-out vehicle drifted through the dirt trail that ran parallel to the old access road. Inside, a biometric screen displayed Jason's face, older, colder, tagged as EXPIRED. The driver, suited in unmarked tactical gear, tapped once on his comms. Visual match confirmed. Trigger window is live. From the back seat, a female voice responded. Then start the protocol. We take him before he finds the vault. Jason and Echo moved fast. The forest route wasn't mapped, but Jason remembered the older recon maps burned into his memory from Langley's original files. 3 ridges, a dried riverbed, and then a small settlement that used to act as a drop point for supplies. They didn't speak much, just moved, quiet, measured. By the time they hit the first ridge, Jason could see fresh tracks in the dirt, too fresh. Not forest prints, tactical boots, heavy, deliberate. They weren't being followed. They were being channeled. Inside the cabin, Sima found the note Jason had left. 3 words. Stay with Langley. It made no sense. Langley was dead, but she didn't panic. She walked to the trapdoor, opened it again, and went down. The basement lights were still on. But the screen was blank now. Instead, a recording played, motion triggered from Jason's departure. Langley's face. Not in a message. In a looped confession. And Sima was the only one watching it. Jason and Echo stopped just before the second ridge. Jason crouched low, brushing his fingers along a rusted coil half buried in the soil. Wire. Electrified. Freshly powered. Trip fencing, he muttered. Echo's jaw tensed. They're boxing us in. Jason didn't nod. He just looked upward. The sky above them was too quiet. No birds, no insects. Then he saw it, a faint shimmer barely there. A drone. Not consumer grade, military stealth shell. They weren't tracking him with heat. They were tracking his memory signature. Jason whispered under his breath. They activated MK beacon protocol. Far off, inside a mobile command base cloaked as a medical trailer, Dr. Clemens stared at the waveform data. Jason's memory pulses weren't just spikes, they were leaking. Project Omega hadn't just implanted identities, it broadcasted them in failure states. And Jason's had begun to fail. She smiled. Begin the pressure run. No contact, just push him into panic territory. The operator next to her raised a brow. You want to spook him? No, I want to see if E5 comes out. Jason stopped suddenly halfway down the second slope. He reached down, pulled up a rock, and under it, a thin black strip no wider than a pencil. Echo knelt. What is that? He didn't answer, just slid it into his pack. But his hand was trembling slightly. Because it was one of his own drop caches. From 16 years ago. Which meant someone had reconstructed his memory map from the original files. And someone knew where he'd go before he got there. At the bottom of the ravine they found the first marker, a weathered post, metal, burned halfway through. Jason scratched at the rust with a blade. Underneath the layers he found the insignia. Ural 3 rebuild start. It wasn't a vault entrance. It was a signal point. This was the first activation node, a ping tower for the long-range Omega vault buried beneath the mountains. They were right on track. And right on schedule. Echo looked over at him. How long until they closed the window? Jason didn't answer. but the countdown was already visible in his vision. 62 hours. Back at the cabin, the kids were packed. Sima had taken charge, but the younger ones were restless. A knock came at the door, one knock, pause, two knocks, then nothing. Sima didn't flinch. She walked to the side panel, opened a long-hidden compartment, and took out a blade no bigger than her hand. Jason had left it for emergencies. She walked to the door, opened it. No one was there. Just a small envelope. Inside, a photo of Jason standing in a lab, surrounded by children, but not the ones here. These were older, sharper, and one of them looked like her. Jason and Echo found cover in a collapsed rail tunnel just west of the second slope. It wasn't on any modern map, but Jason had laid its bones years ago. They rested in silence for a while. Then Jason spoke, staring at nothing. They'll use a disorient protocol next. Echo nodded. How bad? Jason answered without emotion. They'll hijack the familiar, force me to see dead handlers, buried memories, break the tether between now and then. Echo glanced over. You think it'll work? Jason looked up at the dark tunnel ceiling. I'm not sure which version of me they're trying to break. Back in the mobile command unit, Dr. Clemens clicked on a new feed. The drone view zoomed in on a strange static pulse near Jason's location. It was flickering, irregular. She leaned in. He's remembering things out of order. This isn't tactical, this is raw. The screen changed again. Jason was no longer in the tunnel. He was in a desert. No, a training field. Then water. Then screaming. Clemens watched, fascinated. It's begun. She stood. Prepare the hallucination trigger. Give him exactly what he's not ready to remember. Jason jerked slightly. The tunnel was gone. He stood knee-deep in water, cold, salt in the air, a girl screaming somewhere behind him. Then silence. Then Langley. Not alive, but speaking. You're the only one who ran back in. Jason tried to breathe. Tried to blink. But nothing moved. Echo's voice pulled him out. You all right? Jason flinched back. They were still in the tunnel. Her hand was on his shoulder. The injector was still in the bag. He wasn't cracking. But he was close. The hallucination hadn't faded, it had retreated, waiting like a shadow behind Jason Statham's eyes. Even now, as he moved through the woods with Echo beside him, it clung to the edge of his perception. The rail tunnel was behind them. The second ridge passed, and ahead, through fog and dense bark, stood the abandoned comms tower. It wasn't operational anymore. At least it shouldn't have been. Jason slowed as they reached the chain-link fence that hung limp on its posts. Rusted, cut. Someone had been here recently, and not just once. He crouched beside a snapped link. Boot drag small, two of them. Someone's been running recon sweeps through here. He said it more to himself than to Echo. She scanned the treetops. How long before they hit us direct? Jason's response was a look, the kind he'd only given once before. Not yet, but soon. In the Blacksite Command trailer 80 kilometers north, Dr. Clemens watched the biometric overlay on Jason's neural map begin to shimmer again. The hallucinations were not random. The deeper he moved toward the original signal pylon, the more his fractured memories began to sink. Layer in Phase 2, interpersonal loss, she instructed. The technician hesitated. That will unlock emotional regression pathways. He could collapse. Dr. Clemens didn't blink. He could also wake up fully. Jason stepped through the creaking door of the tower's main floor. Everything smelled of dust, decay, and old copper, like memories of a war you tried to forget but never fully buried. And then it hit him, not through his eyes but his chest. He wasn't standing in the tower anymore. He was on the shoreline again. Only now there was blood on his hands. His clothes were soaked. A body at his feet, not enemy, not stranger, a friend. W4. The real one. Jason staggered back. Echo caught his arm before he could fall into the rusted frame behind him. He blinked hard, jaw clenched. I saw him, he muttered. They made me forget him. Echo pulled him back into focus. How do you know what's real? Jason looked up, eyes wet. I don't. Back at the cabin, the children had packed, but the air felt strange, like something was wrong. Sima hadn't spoken since finding the photo, the one with her lookalike in it. Echo hadn't told her everything. Neither had Jason. She folded the photo and slipped it into the back of her journal. Then she moved to the wall, the panel Jason had used, and began pressing in sequences. Not randomly. Precisely. She had seen them once before in a dream. Or maybe it wasn't a dream. The panel hissed, a drawer slid open. Inside, a notebook, Langley's handwriting. But not addressed to Jason. It was addressed to her. Echo set up a basic M scrambler at the top of the tower while Jason checked the power core. Most of the wires had been cut, but someone had rerouted a battery feed, and recently. Jason traced it to a lead pipe under the floorboards. A bundle of fiber lines led into a cracked wall cavity where a small glowing cylinder blinked red. It was a pulse drive, low range, but it wasn't broadcasting a signal. It was receiving one. Jason whispered, "They're not hunting me. They're waiting for me to activate something." Back in the command trailer, Dr. Clemens's breath caught. The cylinder's signal, too weak to track directly, had just pinged a secondary relay drone. They knew where he was. Now it was only a matter of closing the loop. "Send the ghost squad," she said quietly. "Tell them not to engage, just confirm his direction." The operator glanced back, "And if he finds the real vault?" Clemens smiled faintly. "Then we won't need to kill him. He'll kill himself trying to open it." Jason was back in motion. He and Echo left the tower before its signal could triangulate them. He didn't trust the ground anymore. It was too obvious. Instead, he rerouted them through the river, shallow, biting cold but clean of any trackable material. Halfway across, Echo stopped. A boy stood on the far bank, younger than the others, maybe 8, wearing no shoes. Jason's eyes narrowed. It wasn't a real boy. It was one of the mental implants, memory fragments. But something about the way the boy moved. Jason stepped forward. "Don't engage," he muttered. Echo nodded, stepping behind a low rock. She drew her small arc blade. The boy didn't run. He spoke without moving his lips. "You failed the first gate. You can't open the second." Then he flickered and vanished. Echo whispered, "That wasn't just hallucination. That was embedded command code." Jason knew. It meant someone had rebuilt Omega's last firewall. And it was now protecting his buried identity. In the trailer, Dr. Clemens stared at the data stream. Jason's EEG spiked. The hallucination response had bled into control-level cognition. She didn't know who had embedded that firewall boy, but it wasn't from her team. "Who did that?" she snapped. The technician shook his head. "It's not ours, that's old code, legacy tier, Omega Zero stuff." Clemens turned pale. Omega Zero had been dissolved before Jason was even created. And yet the boy had Jason's voice modulation embedded. That meant Jason Statham might have written his own fail-safe before wiping his memory. The children at the cabin had started to argue. Some wanted to leave, others were afraid. Sima didn't raise her voice, she raised her hand. And for a moment everything stopped. She opened Langley's notebook. Inside were drawings, maps, a name circled in red. Echo B asset locked inside protocol temple. She flipped more pages, schematics, faces. And one photograph clipped to the last page. It was Jason, younger, smiling, with his hand on her shoulder. It was her. Jason reached the far riverbank and stopped. His boots were soaked, the frost biting harder now. Echo followed in silence. They didn't speak. But Jason kept looking up, at the sky, the leaves, the strange motion in the light above the horizon. They weren't alone. Not just physically. Psychologically. He could feel eyes in the back of his memory, not recent, not from this decade. "Echo," he said calmly, "they're about to send a voice through my head." "What kind of voice?" He swallowed hard. "Mind." 10 kilometers out, the ghost squad moved into position. Black suits, heatless weapons, visual dampeners, non-lethal and less ordered. The leader tapped his earpiece. "We have visual on the subject, moving west by riverbank." Dr. Clemens's voice replied coldly, "Hold, let him hear the trigger first." Jason's hand shook slightly. Then the whisper came. His own voice in his head, layered with static. "The vault isn't real. Echo is the vault. You're here to bury it, not open it." He stopped walking. Echo turned to him, hand resting on her holster. "What did you hear?" Jason's face darkened. We've been following the wrong map. Jason Statham stood still on the muddy riverbank, Echo watching him cautiously from a few steps away. The wind had picked up, yet the forest beyond them remained deathly silent, like the air itself didn't dare breathe. The words still rang in his head. Echo is the vault. He didn't believe them, not fully. But something shifted in him. He turned slowly, locking eyes with Echo. For a second, everything went still. Her hand was just barely resting near her hip, not on her weapon, but close. She knew something had changed in him. Jason didn't speak. He just moved forward. Miles away, Dr. Clemens watched the live neural waveform flatten for 3 full seconds. No activity, then a spike. Emotion suppression just kicked in, the technician reported. He's going cold. Let it play, she whispered. Let him start asking the questions we planted. Jason and Echo pressed on in silence. The river bent sharply, leading them into a gully overgrown with moss and lichen. Small stones crunched under their boots. Jason's grip on his gear had tightened. He wasn't hallucinating anymore, but he wasn't grounded either. He wasn't sure who Echo was. Or worse, who he had been programmed to believe she was. They crossed under an old metal beam, partially collapsed and rusted. Jason glanced up and saw numbers scorched into the steel, E509432. His own designation, buried in the structure like a forgotten serial number. He didn't say a word, but Echo noticed him notice. At the cabin, Sima traced her fingers over the map in Langley's notebook. One page showed a tunnel route labeled Vault Path, but at the bottom of the map in red ink were 2 words circled again and again. False flag. Her heart pounded. She stood quickly, yanking open the main trapdoor and calling down the others. She didn't wait for Echo. She didn't wait for Jason. She was leaving, because something in that journal told her that the vault Jason was chasing wasn't just a destination. It was a kill switch. Jason stopped again as they entered a thinning forest line. They were close to the uplink plateau now, a flat stretch of rocky terrain where the Omega signal first originated. Wind whipped across the stones. And there, resting at the center of the clearing, was a coffin-sized container sealed with layered digital locks. Jason's breath caught. That wasn't just storage, that was containment. And Echo didn't react with surprise. She stepped toward it like she knew it would be there. He didn't say anything, just watched her hand hover over the first lock. And that's when he knew. She was Echo, not the one from the old mission. She had her voice, her walk, her reflexes. But Echo B had died at the end of the Ural breach. He had buried her himself. Whoever this was, she was either an implant, a mimic, or worse. A built memory. He stepped back slowly. She turned, eyes narrowing. You just remembered something, didn't you? She asked, her voice calm. Jason didn't move. You're not her, he said quietly. In the Blacksay trailer, Clemens leaned forward. He's awake. The tech looked nervous. Should we abort the embed? No, Clemens said. Let him confront her. If she's real, we'll see it. If she's not, he'll do what E5s were trained to do. Which is? Erase corrupted assets. Jason moved first. He didn't attack, he disengaged, sliding back into a defensive angle just enough to shift the balance of terrain. Echo didn't chase. She just stood there, then said the words that detonated in his skull. You trained me, Jason. You just don't remember. He froze. His muscles tightened. No hallucination had ever said that before. And the way she said it, it wasn't a command phrase. It wasn't even accusatory. It sounded like grief. Sima and the kids reached the ridge just as the comms tower burst into life, its beacon lighting red, sending a signal directly into the sky. She turned back toward the cabin, then forward toward the valley, toward Jason. She didn't know what he was about to do, but she knew the vault wasn't what he thought. And whatever was inside that container, it was alive. Jason stood before Echo, or whatever she was, and looked at the container. You knew it was here, he said. She nodded. You led us here. No, Jason replied. I was led. She tilted her head. You think I'm the trap? Jason's eyes burned. You're the trigger. Then he stepped forward and placed his hand on the container. Inside the Blacksate, alarm screamed. Container 0 has been touched. DNA match confirmed. Opening sequence initiated. Clemens stood still, her face pale. He activated the sleeper. The container hissed. Gas expelled from the side vents. The locks retracted, one by one. Jason stepped back. Echo didn't move. Inside wasn't a weapon or tech. It was a body, cryogenically sealed. His own face, but younger and angry. Jason fell back 3 steps. The container lights flickered and then died. The younger version of him inside didn't move, but the scanner on the interior glass read one word in red. Awaiting transfer. Echo finally spoke. You were the backup, he was the original. Jason didn't blink. Didn't breathe. The whole world seemed to drop into silence. He looked at her, looked back at the frozen face in the case. Then down at his own hands. The hallucinations weren't glitches. They were attempts to override him. He wasn't the only Jason Statham. He wasn't even the first. Dr. Clemens ran from the trailer, headset still crackling. Do not let him complete the transfer, she screamed into comms. He'll destabilize. But it was too late. The glass on the container began to glow. Jason's fingers twitched. The vault was him. And the other him was waking up.